Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Refining Rhetoric. Today, my guest is E. Ray Moore. I'm excited to have a conversation with him. He's one of the homeschooling pioneers, and of course, recap our conversation with him while we practice the 15 tools of learning, and then we'll talk a little bit more about cryptocurrency. So let's jump in.
Classical Conversation Studios presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Today, my guest is E. Ray Moore. Ray has served for over 45 years in pastoral ministry and has been involved in leading many school choice organizations and movements. Currently, Ray is the founder and director of the Exodus Mandate Project, chairman of the Christian Education Initiative, chairman of the Movement for Public School Exit, and president of the board at Frontline Ministries, which he co-founded nearly 30 years ago. He is the author of 2 books, including Let My Children Go, and the executive producer of 2 films, including the award-winning 2011 film IndoctriNation. Before his career, Ray graduated from the Citadel in South Carolina and from Grace Theological Seminary in Indiana. He and his wife, Gail, have 4 children and 8 grandchildren. All right, Ray, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Robert.
You founded and have led a lot of different organizations over the years, and I want to talk about some of the ones we just mentioned. But first, what is the Exodus Mandate Project, and why did you start it?
Exodus Mandate is a Christian ministry to encourage and assist Christian families, churches, pastors to leave behind the state-run public school system for the promised land of Christian schools, campus Christian schools, or Christ-centered homeschooling. And additionally, it's our hope and prayer that a fresh obedience by Christian families in educating their children according to biblical commands would prove to be a key for the revival of our families, our churches, and our culture. So that's our mission statement in a short version.
Yeah. Well, I find life works out better when we follow God's commands. So, what really started you down this idea? I mean, you launched it in, I think, the late 90s. Why did you feel like this was necessary at that time?
Well, my wife and I actually started our homeschooling adventure in 1977 when I was finishing up my theological seminary training at Grace Seminary in Indiana. And I had everything done but the thesis. So we moved down to the Purdue University campus to open up an evangelical campus ministry on campus. And our oldest son, who's now 51, was turning 6. And we were really struggling with what we were going to do with his education. We weren't going to put him in a public school for some of the same reasons that we wouldn't now. But even though in those days, in the 70s, they didn't seem as bad as they are today. Mm-hmm. We looked at a private Christian school, and it was really financially prohibitive. So we prayed, and one day I can still remember thinking about it, still looking back all those years. We talked about a family school. We didn't actually call it homeschool. And my wife said, I remember very distinctly, she said, I think I can do it. So we launched the family school at that time. Later, it became known as homeschooling. And our oldest boy was old enough to know that this was weird. And I remember him saying, he doesn't remember it, but he said, Mommy and Daddy, don't do this to me. He thought he ought to be in school like every other first grader. And we said, we're going to try it 1 year at a time and just see how it works out. And if it doesn't work, we'll put you in school. Well, it worked out much better than we imagined. And so here we are now, 40, 50 years later, have done it for all of our 4 children, and then our grandkids pretty much the same way. And we launched a ministry 20 years later, 1997. We launched the Exodus Mandate Ministry. That was 20 years after we had a homeschool all 4 of our children, usually up through middle school. So we showed it. We conducted an experiment, and it worked so well with our kids that we thought maybe we could recommend it to other people.
That's awesome. I love that idea of the family school. And so you launched that in 1997, and then 22 years later?
22 years later, we it was two steps. We started Frontline Ministries in 1994,
Okay.
and it was a broader mission. We were talking about revival, apologetics, education. We had many things on the table, but we didn't raise the funds that we needed to do all that we wanted to do. So in 97, we narrowed our objectives and concentrated primarily on K-12 Christian education and homeschooling.
That's awesome. And then in 2019, you started the Christian Education Initiative. And so how's that a little bit different than the Exodus Mandate Project, and what does that entail?
Well, we were among the first with Exodus Mandate in 97 to offer a real aggressive ministry to get out of public schools and to, move into K-12 campus Christian schools or homeschooling. So we were really pushing that idea. I'm sure there were others that were doing it, and we can find some of it, but we were among the first to offer an aggressive approach. Well, over the next 20 or so years, many other groups raised up. Actually, I believe your mother started Classical Conversations about 20 years ago, and there have been so many groups like that a lot of them in the last 5 or 10 years. And we had an informal alliance of about a dozen groups that were working together kind of informally and helping one another. So in 2019, we decided to launch it as a formal alliance and give it a name, and that's the Christian Education Initiative. And the URL for that, and we urge your people to look at it, is christedu.org, christedu.org. And that was started, and we have 20 member groups now. So it's done pretty well, and we're hoping that Lee Bortons might join us. She's talking about it, but hasn't yet, but she's come to our meetings. And so we've launched that, and we'll be having a summit late this summer, actually early fall. And but it's a leaders group only. And some of the groups are pretty substantial. It's basically an organization just to help grow Christian education and through our different member groups, and then also to advance the Great Commission and the cultural mandate. And the cultural mandate is simply, the idea that God's law should supervise all in culture and life. It's not, we don't live in a pietistic world. We believe God's law, should govern. So the Great Commission is the first part of what we're accomplishing.
That's wonderful. And I know, definitely support that initiative. And of course, with COVID in 2020, there's the public school exit.
Right.
And so what's a public school exit? And was that because of COVID, or is that being planned beforehand?
Well, there were some people on the West Coast who I've gotten to be very close friends with, and so has your mom, Lee Bortons, who wanted to have something similar to Exodus Mandate, but they were 3,000 miles away. They basically said, how would you feel if we sort of did something like Exodus Mandate and give it another name? I said, man, if there were 100 people like you would do that, I'd be all for it. I'm trying to clone myself anyway. So they launched it in 2 years ago. And then they later asked me if I would be the chairman. And I said, I don't have time for anything more. I said, no, all you got to do is come on a conference call once or twice a week, and it'll be a Zoom call, and we'll consult and we'll run it. So the CEO is Dran Reese, and she's one of these awesome female Christian leaders like your mom, Lee. Just gets things done, just so competent, so efficient, godly, bright. And so she's the CEO and I'm the chairman, and I'm just kind of there to give advice and give some direction, and I'm just sitting back and enjoying watching that. And that's publicschoolexit.com. And they're 2 years old. And it might right now it's outstripped Exodus Mandate, and that's okay. It's probably one of the most aggressive things going in the country for getting them out and then pointing them toward one of the Christian education models of curricula. We don't do curriculum ourselves, but we do help direct people. And we have a number of people on our advisory board that are starting up Christian schools. I think your mother has been a guest. And so that is new, 2 years old, and we already are reaching into Canada. Quite an outstanding program, and I'm going along for the ride. I'm the chairman.
That's fun. I love how loosely you've held all these over the years, and your heart for homeschooling and the heart for the family in general, and just that parents, we agree with you that the Bible is pretty clear on who's responsible for the family education, and it's not the government. So for you, like, why is school choice so important? And then there's kind of two different things people think about, like school choice. Like, parents just need to have the opportunity to choose what options are for them and the legal right to direct their children's education. But then there's also the school choice movement that thinks the government should pay for it. So what side of it, those ideas are you on, and why?
We use that term sometimes guardedly because it does often imply vouchers, charters, and the government involving and assisting, and sometimes the choice, school choice they advocate is a choice among public school choices. And we're not in favor of public education at all. We don't think the state should be involved. So we prefer a term, even though I do use that term, because you have to sometimes speak the language that the other side is speaking. But sometimes if I get a choice, I prefer to use the term educational freedom or the separation of school and state. We don't want the government involved in the K-12 education of children. Really, we don't want them involved in higher ed either, but we're only going to address, in our movement right now, the best we can do is addressing K-12 education. We are in favor of education freedom, and we think that the education should be, the education of children has been assigned to the family and the church, or private associations in some cases if you're not a religious person, but certainly not to government. They only mess it up, which is what they've done.
Yeah, that we've spent billions, if not trillions of dollars on education and continue to get worse and worse results in our government institutions. I love that saying that you just gave us, was separation of school and state. And you talk about mandates in the biblical worldview. Of course, we're a Christian organization. Where in the Bible, or what does the Bible say about who's responsible for the education of young people?
Well, I would say the early text would be Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. And it shows there that it's a family primarily. There are other texts. We could look at Ephesians 6, 4. There are many verses that deal with it. We use the Great Commission. We think that Jesus gave the Great Commission to the church to disciple the nations, and certainly our own children should be in that commission. I don't think we should be out evangelizing and discipling the nations and turning our children over to the pagans to disciple, which is what most Christians have done until recent times. Psalm 78 talks about passing the faith down through the generations. I think it shows 3 or 4 generations there. I don't have my Bible in front of me, but we will cite those texts. Ephesians 6, 4, raise your children up with this admonition and the instruction of the Lord. So there's just ample text for it. But I think a key one going back to the Old Testament would be Deuteronomy 6, 1 to 9 or 4 to 9.
That's great. I know growing up, there was, even the church, there was people who were like, why are you homeschooling? And why aren't you sending your kids to these schools? And so, you were a pioneer in 1977 and in 1997. So, what are the consequences of the traditional government-run education system that you were seeing, even when, quote unquote, the schools were better?
Well, in 77, it wasn't as clear to me as it is now. We have to see theology and doctrine and the Bible against a backdrop of a crisis or a failure. And so the failure of the public school system, I knew it wasn't good, but boy, have I learned a lot since 1977. So I think we see now anything, we would take a position as Christians that Christ is at the foundation of anything that God can bless. Jesus is the foundation and the scripture. And so anything that does not have him as the foundation and the Bible as a guide will fail. And so even if we had conservative public schools and they were not as aggressively evil as they have become today, they would still end up failing because they do not have Christ at the center. Remember the famous quote from Luther? I think he said, "I'm afraid that the schools will prove to be the great gates of hell." Anything that does not have Christ at the foundation will ultimately corrupt itself, something to that effect. And then we take the position that the system cannot be reformed. And that's why we don't encourage people running for school board. And that seems like a good thing to do, a logical thing to do. You know, the schools are bad. Let's get good people elected to the school board, but they won't be able to fix it. It'll not be, it's not reformable because it's not broken. It's actually working. Public education is socialism, and it's the great socialism, great model for socialism of all times. And conservative people and Christian people shouldn't be supporting any socialistic model. We don't support it in healthcare and many other things. So why would we support it in the area of education? Public education fits the model of the definition of socialism, where the government owns all productivity, the means of production, and services. And that's the system. So we don't want the government in that arena, and it's not working. We need to get out of there. So those are some of the reasons. And then, of course, because it's got the wrong foundation, it corrupts itself. And we're seeing all these things happening now. 1619 Project, Howard Zinn's Marxist interpretation of history, critical race theory is now just permeated the system, LGBTQ. And these are like viruses that attach themselves to a body that's got no immunity. So it's just wrecking the system. So Christians are finally waking up, and they're leaving by the millions, which is I'm glad to see.
It's been a lifetime of work for you. So are you optimistic about the future of education in the United States, and maybe even talk about globally what you're seeing?
Well, yes, I guess that last question kind of leads into that. Right now, we say we're living in a once in a 100-year moment of history. 2 years ago, when the pandemic hit, it shut all the schools down, all schools. And prior to that moment, we think there were about 2.5 million children being homeschooled in America, most of them Christians. And today, Dr. Brian Ray, who is a leading researcher on home education in the nation, he says there are between 5 and 6 million children being homeschooled, and most of those would be Christians. And it's likely to go much higher. The dust is not settled. The fog is not cleared. And so right now we should be working hard to try to grow the movement. Jesus said in John 9:4, he said, "I must work the works of him who sent me while it is today, for the night comes when no man can work." And so God has given us a window or an open door to grow this movement. And I know Classical Conversations is doing their part. I was so joyful to be up there at your national convention, and was able to give an award to Lee Borton's, your mom, and thanking her for all the great work that she has done. And I know you're working in 30, 40, 50 foreign countries. It's just amazing. I want to say that my grandchildren years ago, now they're grown now, they were in Classical Conversations for a time. We never used it because our kids were already gone when it came along. But then my sister was homeschooling her 3 granddaughters, and they were using Classical Conversations. So even though I've never used it, I'm familiar with it and how well it works because it's worked in my family. But we're living in some pretty dark days, and I know the enemy will probably try to come against us at some point. But right now, we've got to grow this movement into millions. It is in millions right now, but if we really grow up to 30 or 40%, and I can't say what it is right now, it might be 15 to 20% of the total K-12 population. But let's say we would go to grow to 30 or 40%. We believe the public model, the public system would begin to implode and unravel. And the political people may realize they know it's failing too, and they fund it anyway. Maybe they would say, look, this is not working. We're going to let you Christians do it, hand it back to the churches and families and private groups where it belongs and where it was for the first 200 years of American history. We had no state-run public schools until 1840s. And let you all handle it. And we're going to pick up the garbage and pave the roads, save ourselves half of our state budget. Most states, half of their budget is K-12 public education and higher ed. So it'd be good if they would give us a tax break and let us do the job. And that's a dream, but we could get there if we grow the movement strong enough where the political people will realize how unpopular public education is, and they will just give it up.
Mm-hmm. What do you see? I mean, on the federal level, the Department of Education is obviously it's not a constitutional entity, but each of these states, or a lot of states, have it in their own constitution about educating the general public and things like that. So, what would you kind of see as, giving us our taxpayer dollars back would be preferable by not taking it in the first place. But what are some other things that you're seeing?
Sadly, what you say is correct. It is written in state constitutions, but it's certainly not in the federal constitution. And we only got a federal Department of Education in 1978. It was President Jimmy Carter made a promise to the teachers' unions. But prior to that, we didn't even have a educational department. And of course, it's become one of the worst departments. It's just filled with people who are anti-Christian and, for anything that would be against a Christian and homeschool movement. So I don't know how we'd get rid of that, but the Republicans advocated it up through Reagan. And then after that, they dropped it out of their platform, and they want to have state education just as much as the Democrats do. It's terrible. And they think they can fix it. Well, they're not going to be able to fix it. And state education is the domain of the left. And we have a Department of Education in my state, and it's this terrible place to be. I'm sure there's some good people there, but they are imposing the same agenda at the state level. So the way that would have to happen, where we would have to grow the movement so strong and so dominant politically that the governments in the states would then repeal those laws and perhaps have to take that out of the constitution of the state, which would be hard to do, but it could be done.
Well, even those states that have that in the constitution don't necessarily provide or follow those aspects because, again, public schooling wasn't necessarily around for the beginning of our history. And like in the state of North Carolina, in the Constitution, they promise free college for everyone, but it's obviously that's not sustainable, and so they don't try to enforce that because they can't fund it. So I think there's definitely a path forward. But like you said, I think it starts with families taking their God-given role and churches taking their God-given role, and what the Bible says, what our responsibility is for education and bringing up the next generation. What type of things have you and your wife, Gail, faced around school choice or separation of school and government? And what are some issues that maybe your grandchildren or children have faced while choosing education or home education or private Christian education for their children?
Well, we started in 1977. It wasn't even regulated. There were no laws about anything dealing with it. Nobody was doing it. And we started in 77, and we claim we're the first family in Indiana. Now, there may have been somebody else doing it, but the state of Indiana actually approached us about why we were doing it and said that we were the only family they knew. So we took that to mean we were the first family, but I'm sure there could have been others that were underground. But they contacted us and wanted to know why we were doing it, what we were doing. We told them, and they said, well, we would like you to help us create a homeschool permission form. You know, the government has to have a form for everything.
Sure.
So we said, no, we wouldn't do that because it's not yours to give. Permission is not yours to give. That comes from God. But we'd be willing to help you create a homeschool notification form, but not a permission form. And then we told them that we had a little discussion. It was on the phone that they could not interfere with our homeschool experiment and conduct if they couldn't show, in fact, that we were harming our children in some way. We just let them know that we weren't going to respect it. And they never contacted me again. I don't know why or what. We were waiting for the shoe to drop. I had contacted Christian constitutional lawyer David Gibbs. He's still living, but he was one of the main ones going around the country at that time defending Christian schools. And if you got into litigation, he would go to court with you, and he offered to defend us if we needed it. He told us we were really, really cutting it close. I remember that. He said, you need to be careful. They might come after you and might try to take your children. Well, they never contacted me again, and I didn't contact them. So, but that was our first brush. Now we know the left made a terrible mistake tactically or strategically. They let the genie out of the bottle. And I don't know what we would have done. We're the only family, we didn't know another family homeschooling for about 4 years in Indiana. And I don't know what we'd have done if we'd had the full force of the law against us and trying to take our children away or what. I think we would have tried to stay firm. But now there's so many millions of people doing it. I don't know. Can they put millions of people in jail? I don't think so. And they're trying now to figure out how to put the genie back in the bottle. Harvard University Law School was sponsoring a symposium on what to do about homeschooling. And there's a woman named Bartlett, I believe her name was, and they called this the conference, but they had to shut it down because of COVID. But they reinvigorated. I think Brian Ray and some of our people went as observers. But it was all about how to suppress and deal with the homeschool movement. They can't allow millions of children to be educated responsibly, biblically, constitutionally, looking at America's historic institutions. They've got to have these children turn out left and progressive. And we are raising a whole different breed of children. It's a great threat to the left and to their monopoly over the culture. So I think we're in for some battles. Over the years, there's a thing called law review articles where people debate new legal constitutional strategies, and they post them in these prestigious law reviews that nobody reads but a few lawyers, but they debate and discuss things. And they've had a lot of articles, say 4 or 5 over the last few years, in these law reviews about how to suppress and shut down and deal with this homeschool movement, which is very much a threat.
Yeah, when one side of the argument's not having any babies, their best bet is to take the babies the other side is having and transform them into their own vision. I think, a lot of people are waking up to that. And, even in the Bible, I remember with, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel, right, when the Babylonians took over the Jews, they took all their young men to educate them in the Babylonian ways and to create Babylonians really out of the Jewish young people. And, that's really no different than what secularists have done with our public school systems.
One difference there, Robert, on that situation is that those children, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel, they had been taken away. They were forced into captivity, and their parents didn't freely do that. But today, Christian families freely hand their children over to Babylonian education. So we shouldn't be doing that. We don't need to do it. We have freedom of choice, or school choice, as you say. We do have choice. Now, it's not going to be easy sometimes because you have to be at home with your children if you're a mother in most cases. if you put your kids in a private Christian school, it's costing you money, but there's nobody saying you can't do it right now. And I know they want to do that. We are their worst nightmare. It's a nightmare to think that they could lose control of this culture and this nation just because of what they've done to the children. And as my old friend Marshall Fritz used to say, Satan has no brakes. The devil doesn't look around and say, man, boy, we are doing so much harm to these children. Somebody's going to get upset and they're going to pull away. We better start being good. The devil doesn't ever say, I'm going to be good. He can't be good. He has to go to the next level of evil. And so he doesn't have any brakes. And so the more they pour on this evil critical race theory, this ungodly sex education, families are just finally breaking and they're having enough and they're leaving. And they're finding ministries like Classical Conversations. They're finding groups like Public School Exit, Exodus Mandate, and they're coming to us and we're directing them into curriculum and Christian school models. So we're in an amazing moment of opportunity, and I know your group organization sees it, but we need to double down and triple down while it is today, as Jesus said, because a night comes when no man can work.
Do you see purpose going forward with these organizations? I mean, when you started homeschooling, there might have been 50 of y'all in the United States, maybe less if you're the only one in Indiana. And then, we got a few 100,000 and then millions. And then, like you said, 5 to 6 million. Do you say like, oh man, we've arrived, we've accomplished, the goals that I never thought I'd see? Or does it kind of reinvigorate you to, push for that next level?
The answer is yes. We are in a unusual moment, but when God really works, Satan, he gets pretty upset about it. So we're going to see a lot of power against us. We are likening what's the moment we're in, sort of the Psalm 126 text, when the children of Israel were released from captivity in Babylon after 70 years. And most people believe Psalm 126 is a psalm of that moment. And it says, when the Lord brought back the captive ones of Zion, we were like those who dream. And then our mouth was filled with laughter and joy. And they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. And then we echo back, yes, the Lord has done great things for us. And then the last two verses, it says, those who sow in tears will reap, and they will doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing their sheaves with them. So we have sowed for many years. Classical Conversation, for 20 years you've sowed, and now you're reaping a great harvest, and so are we. But it's still not going to be easy. If you may remember, they came back in 520, I think it was, 536 BC, and they still had to struggle to put the temple up. God had ordered them to rebuild the temple, but they didn't do that for 16 more years because of opposition. So even when you're winning, it's still a hard slog and a lot of work. So yes, I'm living the life now. I don't know if I ever believed that we would get to this point that I would live to see this. I just knew that God had led me to do this in 1997, in 1977 first, and that it was the right thing to do, and I would leave the results with the Lord, but I'm living to see it. I have a need, though, I'll put out there for prayer. I'm going to have to find a successor. I think you're the successor to your mom, but I'm 78 and I can go on a year or two more, but my board has said, look, you need a replacement, and they want me to find somebody, by this time next year, which we're working on that now. So the problem we have with that a little bit is that we have a budgetary constraints, and I can't hire somebody if I can't pay them. So we have a budget for a staff of 3.5, and so that's a big need. And my board has given me a deadline. I want to work at it as long as I can, but I am 78. I'm in good health. I think my mind is clear. My heart is strong. But, when you get about 80, 81 or 2, you start having diminished faculties.
Yeah, I think most of us are reminded But you said you're looking for a replacement. I mean, that's so important. I know the Bible talks about, raising up and gives us examples of raising other people up. What can we do as maybe just, hey, I'm just a homeschooling dad, I'm just homeschooling mom, or maybe I'm in Christian school and I'm listening to this podcast. Like, what should just your average homeschooling or Christian family be doing to make sure their parental rights are protected, as well as educate their neighbor and the person next to them in their pew about what the Bible says, whose responsibility is the education of the children?
If you can elect good men and women in your state at the legislative level, that would be a good thing to do, and really screen them carefully that they're going to defend the rights and to protect the liberties of homeschoolers and Christian schoolers. The other thing that your families can do, we all need to get aggressive about reaching out to our families, our neighbors, and our fellow church members who are not homeschooling or have their kids in Christian school. And I believe what I see of Classical Conversations, you are doing that. So right now, people are listening to you and listening to me that weren't willing to listen 5 years ago. We've got a girl that's in our ministry who goes to a large Baptist church. She's a volunteer, and she's a very strong homeschool family. And the church is a very conservative Baptist church, but she's one of the few homeschool families in the church, and most of them public school. And she's been trying to talk to them for years, and they just wouldn't listen. And the pastor would see her coming, and he would run the other way. So when the COVID hit, I said, Joan, we're in a new day. He said, they're going to listen to you now. And she said, oh, Ray, I've worked so hard, and they won't listen to me. But they did. And so the pastor came to her and asked her if she would do some homeschool seminars in the church. She didn't know what to think. And then he took his kids out, and they were in public school and put them in a private Christian school. Now, the church is not overwhelmingly going in our direction, but there's openness, and families are looking at it. So this is a new day for you who are homeschooling or in Classical Conversations. You need to take the attitude that people are listening to me, will listen to me now, and you need to have good literature to give them. That's one thing we can do here at the office. I think y'all have good literature too, but we provide a lot of tracts, articles on making the argument to get out and why, the scriptural argument, and then we let other people do the curriculum. So if people are interested in getting samples of my tracts and articles, they can email us at exodusmandate@gmail.com, and the webpage there is exodusmandate.org. And so we have our arguments are tailored toward helping make the argument to leave and to go into Christian school. And then my wife and I have written a book together called The Promise of Jonadab, Building a Christian Family Legacy in a Time of Cultural Decline. I believe I've given a complimentary copy to your mom. If they'll send us a donation, $10 or $12, it's really inexpensive. On the webpage, we'll send them a copy, an autographed copy.
That's great. Yeah, and love your stuff. And I know you can get a lot of great information on your websites, and I tend to visit them to see what's new and see what's going on. So for those who maybe didn't listen to the beginning of the show, can you just share what websites are there, and maybe some social media platforms as well where they can connect with you?
My principal website to get in contact with me, and I'm the director and founder of this 25 years ago, called exodusmandate.org. And then recently, I was involved with a startup of publicschoolexit.com, and I'm the chairman of the board, but Dran Reese runs that, and I hardly recommend that to you because they have so much help for newbies and people who want to get started and don't know what to do. And then the third one, and I'm sorry for so many groups, but it's just the way our life is unfolded, we started ChristEDU.org, Christian Education Initiative, and that's a leaders group only. You have to be a head of an organization to be in that one, ChristEDU.org, and it's an alliance of 22 ministries or organizations like ours.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for your life's work, and I know that your legacy is impacting so many people in America, and they might not have heard you, but maybe the reason they're homeschooling is because one of their friends had picked up some of your literature. So, Ray, thanks for coming on my podcast today.
Thank you. And I'm so happy to see the work that Classical Conversation is doing. Your mom's still around and she's passing the baton, and it looks like it's going to be done well.
Well, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with one of the homeschooling pioneers. And in the 5 core habits of grammar, using the tool of attending, which is differentiating the word from other known ideas. We talked about the different organizations that he is involved in, from IndoctriNation, the Exodus Mandate Project, Public School Exit, and how they're different and how they are the same, and the regional basis of a number of those. He talked about the 5 common topics of dialectic, circumstance, discovering what else is happening at the same time in other places. And of course, we know from the child mask mandates to public schools, woke agenda, and of course, the COVID and the coronavirus policies that shut down schools really opened the eyes to so many parents, and so many more people are homeschooling now than ever before. And it's great to kind of walk down memory lane with Ray. And that leads me to the 5 canons of rhetoric and memory. He just told so many good stories about his homeschooling journey, homeschooling with his wife, Gail, and really being, maybe the first person or one of the very first people in his entire state to be homeschooling at that time. It was just a great conversation. So thank you for joining us. Let's talk about current events. We are excited today to practice our 15 tools of learning together with current events. And we are talking about money. And this is a second part of a 2-part series. And today we're going to be looking at what the Bible says about money. But before that, I just want to talk about a little bit about our monetary policy. And something you need to look up is modern money theory. And so when we talk about the grammar stage, we want to learn about what are our economists thinking about. So there's the modern money theory, basically says the government can spend as much money as they want, and by manipulating taxes and interest rates and regulations, they can keep unemployment low and people happy. And so that's what the current administration is working on, and why passing trillions of dollars and printing trillions of dollars, which really the last 4 or 5 administrations have been doing. They think that there's nothing wrong with any of that. But I think we need to start and look at what the Bible says about modern money theory, and what the Bible says about money in general. And I don't know if you guys like to play Monopoly. My children are too young, but that's definitely something that we enjoyed playing growing up. And one of the rules of Monopoly is the bank never runs out of money. And that's true now in the United States as well. You might not know about fractional reserve banking, where if you give a bank $10 and put it in your bank account, historically speaking, they only had to use that. They could actually loan 10 times that amount of money out. So if they had $10, they could loan your neighbor $100. So that's fractional reserve banking, which is another interesting concept that would be important for you to learn. We need to go to the root of it all, though, and go to the Bible and see what it says. One of the things we talk about is Romans 13:8. It says, "Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others have fulfilled the law." We know the Bible also says that, if we owe someone a debt, we have to work it off. We have to pay it back. And so when we look at modern money theory and the fact that our government feels like they can have $30 trillion in debt, I've seen estimates that we're actually over $100 trillion in debt when you think about outstanding future balances that aren't included in that roughly $30 trillion number. And we can see that that is violating Romans 13:8. Proverbs 13:11 says, "Dishonest money dwindles away, but whoever gathers money little by little makes it grow." Sound money, which we talked about, which refers to silver and gold, of course, that was dug out of the ground. And of course, you had to gather it a little bit by a little bit, and you could collect it that way. Dishonest money dwindles away. We know the last couple administrations have been printing trillions and trillions of dollars. Right now, the stock market's crashing. So we've added $1 trillion in currency, but the value of our businesses in the United States and around the world are going down. And so we can see that Proverbs 13:11 being played out in front of us right now. Proverbs 17:16 says, "Why should fools have money in hand to buy wisdom when they are not able to understand it?" I believe the Bible says some things about honest weights. And of course, we see that being played out in front of us. We have all the money in the world because we just printed it, but we can't understand how this is causing inflation. The secretary just said that I thought inflation was transitory, but I was wrong. And of course, we're finding out that modern money theory does in fact not work. And of course, it doesn't align with the Bible. Hosea 12:7-8 says, "A merchant in whose hands are false balances, he loves to oppress. And Ephraim said, Surely I have become rich. I have found wealth for myself. In all my labors, they will find in me no iniquity, which would be sin." And I think that is really interesting, especially when we think about the people printing the money. They're able to distribute it to their friends or to groups that they favor. And so that's a false balance because you as an individual have been working to and exchanging your time and talents for money, and you are expecting that to be a fair balance because you would not have traded your time and talents in exchange for that. So we can see that modern money theory takes away and doesn't match that biblical principle as well. And Proverbs 16:11, I said, "Just balance and scales belong to the Lord. All the weights of the bag are his concern." And so when we are not dealing with people in a way that has a balance in the scales, and of course, as individuals, we have very little control over this. If our elected officials and our bureaucrats decide to spend money that we do not have, we need to be able to hold them accountable, which is why it's important not just to vote, but then to follow up with your elected officials when they are voting in ways that violate these biblical principles. Um, but this is so important and why we need to continue to understand what the Bible says about money and educate ourselves because we create a institution that really violates these standards, and then now we are having to operate in this institutional standard and really are on this hamster wheel that we can't get out of and wondering why everything is going crazy around us. Well, it's because not only do we as Christians not understand money, but our elected officials here in the United States, and especially the bureaucrats, don't understand it as well. And so we can use the 5 core habits, the 5 common topics, and the 5 canons of rhetoric to really look at money from a biblical perspective and know that in itself, it's just a way of transferring our past time and energy and being able to use that for future exchanges. So money in itself isn't evil, but the love of it is, and improper weights and scales, which are happening all around us, are definitely not biblical, and that's a basis of modern money theory, is being able to use those unjust weights and scales, as well as the power of a centralized government to benefit those who they want to benefit and really put down those who they want to put down. So I hope you enjoyed this series on money. You understand a little bit more about what's going on around us, and stay tuned for the rest of our episode. I hope you're enjoying this episode of Refining Rhetoric, and something that I enjoy doing with my son, Trey, and one day with Jonah is going to our local Trail Life troop. Trail Life USA is a Christ-centered, outdoor-based discipleship opportunity for boys and young men from kindergarten through 12th grade. By joining a Trail Life USA troop in your area, your son will discover timeless biblical values within a group of peers and mentors. They've also got some stuff for dads as well. But your son will develop lasting relationships, experience character growth, serve their local community, acquire leadership skills, explore the outdoors, and gain practical skills like camping, emergency first aid, outdoor cooking, and more. With over 39,000 members and 900 troops across all 50 states, there's bound to be a Trail Life USA troop near you. It's also a great opportunity for homeschool dads looking for a way to spend time and instill values in their son while doing activities together. That's one of the reasons why I do it with my son. But you can learn more by visiting traillifeusa.com/homeschool. That's traillifeusa.com/homeschool. Now let's get back to our podcast.
Welcome to Classical Crypto with Will. Today we're going to discuss the evolution of the web and crypto. Because let's be honest, crypto is a digital asset, and digital assets and currencies only live on the internet, so they kind of go hand in hand. How did we get to this point today, and why will cryptos continue to be disruptive and adopted? First, let's incorporate a quick history lesson. Do you know when the US dollar was established as legal tender? I sure didn't. I had to look it up. Back in April of 1792, after the U.S. Constitution was ratified, Congress passed the Mint Act, which established the coinage system of the United States and the dollar as the principal unit of exchange. We were on the gold standard for a long time until Richard Nixon officially took us off of that standard in 1971. Many economists and experts argue that the true age of what we now call the dollar started in 1971, when it was no longer backed by anything but good faith. The dollar became a new entity and a new experiment. And that would mean that this version of the dollar, the one we currently have, is only about 50 years old. And now, even on Capitol Hill, it's being challenged by digital currency. So according to this narrative, when the new dollar was about 20 years old, the internet came along with the Web 1.0. The World Wide Web was birthed in the mid-90s and really was just made up of a few content creators. Web 1.0 was essentially just a web portal. Think of Wikipedia linked together on a bunch of hyperlinks. Not a lot of pictures, hardly any video at all. It was a place where people could go, you could read. There was not a whole lot of interaction between users. Investors started to take notice of this new technology though, and soon the dot-com boom was set off in the late 90s with everyone trying to get a piece of this new technology. We'll define Web 1 as freedom of information. Okay, so what about Web 2.0? Web 1 naturally evolved into Web 2.0 when tech firms started making the internet friendly for users in the form of social networks. At this point, the word on the street was that the internet was going from read-only to read and write, meaning you could now express yourself, put your own thoughts and ideas on the internet, and that is what has primarily characterized Web 2.0, the expression of information. During Web 2, innovators started creating ways for the dollar to become more digital through PayPal and other innovations as more and more transactions started happening online. We'll define Web 2 as the expression of information. Fast forward to today, many of us think that we're on the precipice of the next evolution of the internet, something we refer to as, you guessed it, Web 3.0. Well, if you've been on the internet in the last 10 years, you've utilized, of course, Web 2, Web 2.0, and you may or may not be aware of how valuable your personal data is. Guess what? It's a huge deal. Personal data in Web 2 was extracted from users and sold on the open market to advertisers. Some have even claimed that personal data as an industry is worth more than the entire oil industry on an annual basis. And the oil industry is estimated to generate over $5 trillion in revenue in 2022 alone. So it's a big deal. This is a big industry. Here's what's happening right now. People are tired of renting a Facebook wall. We're tired of these big tech firms where you can rent a little bit of their space. They steal our personal data, sell it to the highest bidder on the internet. People are getting sick of that. We don't want to rent the digital landscape anymore. We want ownership. So as the metaverse slowly grows, as online shopping continues to take off, the digital landscape is growing quickly, and transacting in dollars over the internet is sometimes difficult, and we need to do it more and more and more. So it should come as no surprise to us that cryptocurrencies which are digital currencies that have integration into the internet and what it's becoming, are gaining popularity. It's a more efficient system. I'm not saying it's better or worse than the dollar. It just makes sense, and we need to know these things. Hopefully this segment today has given you a snapshot into currency, the internet, where we've been, where we're headed, and will cause you to ask good questions as we move forward. Until next time, this has been Classical Crypto with Will. Thanks for tuning in.
Wow, another episode in the books. Thank you so much for joining us. Please share this episode with someone you think it would bless, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation, and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.